team in the room. Sorry to interrupt. This is Kirsten. I just wondered, since it can be hard to see folks in the Memorial Conference Room, did you guys want to turn on your cameras, or like Bill, Kevin, for when you speak? Just a thought.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Kirsten. Can you hear us though well through this microphone right here?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to this first meeting of the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Corrections and Clarifications Rulemaking. I know a lot of you were part of the earlier rulemaking to get to this amazing set of rules, and we appreciate those of you who are joining once again to help with the corrections and clarifications, and to newer folks who are joining this rulemaking for the first time. I'm Sylvia Chubrowski with Kearns and West, and I'll be helping to facilitate today's meeting. And I'll go through our agenda and logistics and kind of why we're here in just a minute. But I'm hoping that first I can hand it over to Commissioner Stuart Warren for a brief welcome, and then we'll dive in. I know, Commissioner, you just joined, so putting you on the spot, but hoping you can provide some welcoming remarks now.
Thanks, Sylvia. Yeah, and sorry, everyone. Of course, Zoom wanted to do its updates as soon as I tried to zoom in, so apologies for being a little bit late. But thank you, everyone, for being here today. It's really great to see a lot of you again, and welcome to all the new faces in the room. My name is Stuart Warren, and I've served on the Land Conservation and Development Commission now since 2020. And I was one of the previous co-liaisons to the Rulemaking Advisory Committee for this program. When the Commission first adopted these rules in July 2022, we asked the staff to provide regular progress reports on implementation of the rules. And as we indicated, the Commission we'd be willing to consider future amendments to the rules if needed to facilitate implementation or to ensure that desired outcomes were achieved. The rule amendments we will be working on together are making good on that promise. And as is clear from our rulemaking charter, the Commission is committed to advancing our state's goals for climate pollution reduction and equitable outcomes. However, we know that this program will not be successful without successful implementation by local governments. To that end, we have identified a number of corrections and clarifications that, that will help the temporary rule amendments adopted in April, and we will be intended to clarify and facilitate these improvements through this process. I'm excited about the work ahead of us, and we'll be very interested to hear your thoughts and suggestions for implementing the rules. We have a great group of folks on this advisory committee, and I know that each of you has important contributions to make to this effort. Thank you again for your willingness to roll up your sleeves and help us improve the program with a continued focus on achieving our climate and equity goals.
All right, thank you so much, Commissioner. Really appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and walk us through kind of our agenda and objectives. And so, like the Commissioner said, our purpose today really is to get straight to work on these corrections and clarifications. DLCD and the Commission have embarked on updating these rules, and here today, we really want to make sure that you all understand the rulemaking process and kind of understand the key rule changes. And this is really the chance to dive in and hear your input, and staff is here to listen today. Let's go to the next slide with the agenda. And you might notice that we're all here in this room together, and we see all of you here virtually. It's kind of exciting to get back into rooms together with this hybrid situation. But of course, if anything sounds wonky or is funky logistically, just let us know, chime in. We're all starting and trying these new things together. So for our agenda today, we'll have a overview of the committee and the process for this rulemaking. And then you'll hear a background on the rules themselves and kind of just what we're diving into. And really the bulk of the meeting today is going to be review and discussion of selected rules. So DLCD staff have identified some of the topics that they think are more important to talk about, 7 in particular for today, but also want to hear what you want to talk about. So later today, we'll have an opportunity to hear if you have other topics you want to flag for discussion at the next Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting. And you'll also get a survey after today's meeting to flag anything that you want to discuss in future meetings. And you should have received a meeting packet, probably two emails actually, one with just the agenda for today, and then the earlier meeting packet that had really the substantive materials for today's meeting. So you should have received the charge for this rulemaking, an overview of kind of operating principles for this committee and how we work together, and your role. You also got an overview of the rulemaking process and a roster of committee members, and of course the draft rule amendments. So big packet of rule amendments. Hopefully you got a chance to skim through some of those, if not read them in depth. But in any case, the staff will be going over kind of the key rules during today's meeting. If we go to the next slide, just some virtual participation guidelines. We've all been in the Zoom world together for a long time, but just in case Zoom isn't your favorite platform or most used platform, just want to walk through some of this. Like Casaria said, the meeting's being recorded today. We do have the chat feature turned on just for chatting with the host. We really want conversation today to be in the room. So if you have any troubleshooting issues, please message Casaria Taylor for help, but conversations should kind of just happen in open dialogue today. We ask that you put yourself on mute when you're not speaking to reduce background noise. And when we get to our discussion portions and Q&A, just go ahead and press the raise your hand button to get in the queue to speak, or you can press *9 if you've joined by phone only. We also ask that you say your name before speaking, especially the first time, as we're all kind of getting to know each other. And of course, we encourage you to use video whenever you're speaking, if not for the whole meeting. We also know it's lunchtime, so if you need to turn off your video to eat, that's completely understandable. And we do hope to take a couple breaks today, but please move around, take care of yourself as needed. All right, next slide is just a reminder of where these Zoom things live on the platform. Your mute button's in the corner. If you want to change your participant name, you can click on that participant icon at the bottom, and we would love it if you just provide your first, last name, organization that you're with, and pronouns if you'd like to. And then when we get into the discussions, the raise hand button is kind of hidden in that reactions button for most people, unless you don't have the newest platform of Zoom. So if you click on reactions, you'll find the raise hand button, and also lots of other emoji icons if you'd like to use them. And then the chat feature should be a chat box or just under the more feature on Zoom. Okay, next slide. I think it's just a couple more and then we'll dive in. So discussion guidelines for today. These are in your operating principles, but just a reminder as we go through discussion and today's meeting and future meetings, we hope that you'll honor the agenda and kind of stick to the topics that we have for discussion at the time. We hope to provide a balanced speaking time, so really want to hear from as many people as possible. If you feel like you're saying a lot, maybe hold back. If you're not saying a lot, get brave and get in the conversation. And really just as we get through conversations, want to make sure that you're listening to understand and really asking questions to clarify so that you can provide better comments and respecting each other's viewpoints. We also, of course, ask that you really be hard on the issues and soft on the people, so kind of focus on the substance as we go through conversation. Some of you may be here as Rulemaking Advisory Committee alternates, and if you are, that is great. We welcome you to be here. But if the primary and the alternate are both here at the same time, we would just ask that the primary member be speaking for today's meeting. And I see that our public comment email address was changed. Thank you. We do have time for public comment today, a 10-minute public comment period. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll ask for hands from members of the public if you're here, if you want to make a comment. I think we have 10 minutes reserved towards the end of the meeting. And you're also welcome to provide written comment by email to dlcd.com cfec@dlcd.oregon.gov, and I think we'll put that in the chat as well. Next slide. I think, all right, we can go ahead and take the agenda down and have an opportunity to just do some brief introductions. So I'm going to hand it over to staff to do some intros first, and then we'll go to members. You know, this is a short rulemaking kind of corrections process, so we're not going to do a lot of time for really getting to know each other, but we do at least want to kind of hear who's in the room. So first, I'll hand it over to Matt to maybe lead staff intros.
Sure, we'll introduce some staff. I am Matt Kroll, Planning Services Division Manager here at Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development. And so working on this project overall, I do want to recognize, I think Kirsten Green, our Deputy Director, is here, but maybe off camera at the moment, as our been with this project and sponsoring this, helping us out through both the original rulemaking and this rulemaking. For this rulemaking here, we have our project manager, Bill Holmstrom, who's here. And then working on the various pieces of the different rules, we have Evan Manville and Kevin Young. And Cody Meyer is also part of it. He stepped out. He's on another meeting related to climate pollution reduction right now, so not here. I see Alexis Biddle and Palmer Mason both helping us with some of our liaison work through legislature and other stakeholders. Who else is on here needs to get introduced? I think, oh, Casaria, who's helping us with all of our point of contact and helping us with all of our technology. Right. And then I think we have a couple of ODOT staff who are also joining us here today. I saw Teresa Connolly and is Brian Rankin also? Not Rankin. Brian. Yeah. Anyone else from ODOT here? I think that's the key, folks. So back to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. All right. So now I'll try to see if we can get quick intros from all of our RAC members. So just, you know, your name and organization or group you represent and pronouns if you'd like. And I will try to make sure we get to everyone. And then at the end, we'll see if I missed anyone here. So I'll go to Anne, then Ariel and Brandon.
Yeah, Ann Catlin, City of Albany. Thanks.
Hi, Ariel Nelson, League of Oregon Cities.
Hi, Brandon Wright, Marion County, Building and Planning.
And then Brian, Chris, and Indy.
Brian Rankin, Long Range Planning Manager for the City of Bend.
Chris Green, Senior Planner with HHPR, representing Oregon chapter of American Planning Association.
Hey everybody, Indy Namkung. I use she, they pronouns. I'm the Transportation Justice Coordinator for Verde.
Thank you, welcome. And then over to Jeremy, Jessica, and Joseph. Jeremy Rogers was the first one.
Yeah, I just muted.
Oh, and you're on mute.
God, I thought I'd figure that out by now. Jeremy Rogers, Director of Legal Affairs and Public Policy with Oregon Realtors, and I use he, him pronouns, and glad to be here. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Pells. I'm a Policy Analyst with Washington County Land Use and Transportation.
Joseph Off at the City of Hillsborough Transportation Systems Division.
And then Leah, Matt, and Michael.
Hi, I'm Leah Rausch. I'm an associate planner with the City of Eugene.
Matt Brinkley, Planning Director, City of Medford.
Actually, I don't think Michael's here. Let's go to Neil and then Samantha.
Neil Bonsgard, he, him pronouns, Climate and Transportation Policy Manager at the Environmental Center.
Hi, Samantha Bear, she, her, or Housing Program Director for the Oregon Home Builders Association.
And then to Ryan Amitton, Schuler, and Tom.
Hi, Ryan Amitton, Senior Planner for the City of Corvallis.
Hello, Skylar Warren, Senior Planner with the City of Tigard.
Hi, Tom Kloster, Regional Planning Manager at Metro.
And thank you, Skylar. Apologies for the mispronunciation there. And then Michael Anderson. All right, I don't think Michael is here. Let's see, I think there may be some alternates here too. So I just want to open it up. Are there any RAC members, not RAC primary members that I missed? Chris Green, possibly?
The introduced.
Oh, okay. And then any RAC alternates on the line? All right. Well, hopefully we caught everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and the time that you're devoting to this today. So I think with this, I will hand it over to Bill Holmstrom to go over the committee and process overview, and then we can do a quick Q&A if folks have any questions on that. So over to you, Bill.
Thank you, Sylvia. Again, Bill Holmstrom, Land Use Transportation Planning Coordinator here at DLCD. Thank you again for joining us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the committee and the overview of the process that we're going to be going through for this rulemaking. Hopefully everyone can hear me in the way we've got the microphone set up in here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is our rulemaking charge, which is what guides the work of our committee. It was approved by the Land Conservation and Development Commission at their meeting in April. And there's really two key elements to that I'm going to talk about today: the scope and the desired outcomes from the charge. The scope are what are the things we're going to be talking about in this rulemaking, and they are limited to the corrections and clarifications generally. If you want to look at the charge, it's in item 2 of your packet that you received on page 5 of that packet. So the scope has 29 specific issues identified. Those were identified by staff and working with just figuring things out amongst ourselves, working with local governments the past 2 months since the rules have been adopted, and just coming up with a list of things that fit within that corrections and clarifications bucket that we know that we need to fix. Sometimes they're very simple and minor things, like we messed up the numbering in one place, right? To a little bit more where we need to do a little bit more work on it, and that's why we want to make sure that we have an advisory committee to help us with those things. We also, in April, the commission also adopted a set of temporary amendments. These were came out of some discussions that we heard about Palmer and Alexis. They work with a range of stakeholders, the legislature, folks that work with the legislature, for other stakeholders that are involved with these rules. And it was it became clear to the department that a set of more immediate changes than what we were able to do through the full rulemaking process, which is going to go through November, would be advantageous. So we were able, through the temporary process, to adopt a set of amendments that I think addressed a few key issues that stakeholders had with the way the rules were, and we're happy to be able to do that. So those are in effect now. They've been in effect since May 12th. They are temporary. The reason we did the temporary rulemaking is because of the speed of it. We're able to do it very quickly and in a timeline that made sense for us. The trade-off is that they're temporary and so they don't last, and we want them to last. So as part of this rulemaking, we're going to be looking at those amendments and rolling them into this rule amendment that then makes them a permanent rule, so that it doesn't expire in November like the way the temporary rules are now. So they're set to expire, but ideally our commission will adopt those rules permanently so that they can stay from November on. And then the commission also gave us some flexibility to make some other minor changes as necessary. And we definitely, if there's an issue that fits within that corrections and clarifications kind of scope that we haven't identified, and I should have said, we did solicit from local governments and from other stakeholders earlier this year, say, hey, send us corrections and clarifications that you have, and we distilled that and added that list of 29. If there's other things that we missed, that aren't kind of larger policy issues. We're happy to try to roll that in. There's a few of those that we've identified even since the charge came out. Those are identified in that memo that's in your packet. So that's something that we're able to do, and we're not bound so tightly to just those 29 issues or just the temporary amendments, that we can also have a little bit more flexibility to address some of the things as well. So the charge also includes outcomes that the commission desires to come out of this rulemaking. The commission wants us to confirm and advance the outcomes of the original rulemaking. We're not supposed to upset the apple cart here too much. We're supposed to make it work. The corrections and clarifications are not big policy changes, not big policy shifts. They are changes to the rules to make them more implementable and make it easier for local governments to implement these rules. We want to continue to make sure that we ensure underserved populations help guide decision making, and that we're taking underserved populations to account throughout this process and in local decision making as well. They want us to make sure that we're clarifying rules. That's kind of the key reason we're doing this is so that they be successfully implemented locally. And bottom line is they want to make sure that we continue to ensure that we're going to meet our climate pollution reduction goals. So any questions about the outcomes or the scope or the charge before I move forward? Okay, thank you.
Oh, actually, yep, got a hand up from Ariel.
Sorry, I was a little slow on my clicking. Thanks for that overview. Ariel Nelson here again for League of Oregon Cities. I just wanted to share some perspective from some of our members who have been involved in the previous process and are tracking this process. Want to affirm our commitment to being here to be part of the solution and part of this really important work as your local government implementation partners. Cities are critical to that. I think that, we had a lot of frustration with the previous process. That's not a secret. And I think we're just hoping to, we're seeking assurances that the process from the first track is not going to be the process we can expect for this RAC effort. And hoping to hear that local government input this round will not just be heard, but integrated into the product, the outcomes that I think we share a lot of the goals. Our previous input throughout the process was never counterproductive to the overall goals, meeting our shared climate pollution reduction goals. We believe our input remains valid to advance these goals and deliver the outcome we all want. I think it's also no secret that we were hoping to see a broader scope in this fix approach. But, understanding this is what LCDC has, kind of green lighted for this process, but acknowledging that there are going to be other issues of concerns and other rules outside of the scope that may be impacted as changes are made. So would love to get some clarity or some feedback on what the planner process might be if there are other related rules that need to be addressed or looked at as we make the changes you've identified. So again, just hoping to either now or later in the meeting or later to understand that this is really going to be a true collaboration with your partners and that we're going to see some flexibility in the design scope and timeline to get this right. We're just wanting to ensure that we can implement these rules at the local government level and not just some patchwork fixes that leave some of those other pieces unaddressed. So wanted to put that out there and see if there might be an opportunity to address that in this meeting.
Yes, thank you. We are, this rulemaking, I think, just designed from the beginning to be kind of a narrower scope. I think, I don't want to speak for the commission necessarily, but I think at least some of the folks on our commission were surprised that we came to them so quickly with potential changes, and they were more comfortable with a narrower scope than a wider scope so quickly after adopting the rules. So that's kind of one issue there. And, I think everyone, from the commission to the staff understands that, this isn't going to be our final bite of the apple by any means. That we're going to continue to work with all stakeholders, all the local governments, to move forward, and as issues arise, that we will continue to address them. We know, for example, that there's a substantial housing package that went through earlier this year through the legislature and was signed already. That has some implications for local governments and maybe touches on some of these rules. We know there's going to be a rulemaking that begins in 2024 from the agency to do quite a bit of work around housing. We've committed as an agency to make sure that we're not too siloed here, that we'll work with our housing staff, and they'll work with us to make sure that, to the extent that we need to make adjustments to the transportation planning rules or other elements of our rules, that we can do that in coordination with that housing element, so that we're working together to move forward. So that's one thing that we know is going to be happening in 2024 and moving forward, in addition to other rulemaking in the future for this. In terms of our process here, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the other pieces of this rulemaking process that we'll have available, mostly aimed at local practitioners, that will help provide a little bit more detailed and more kind of in the weeds access for folks, just so that we make sure that we're really getting at I think we need to get at with this rulemaking process. So I'll talk about that a little bit later this meeting.
Thanks, Bill. And thanks for the comment, Ariel. Any other reflections or questions about the committee and kind of that process and charge overview? I'm going to keep going to the background.
Certainly. So yeah, before we get too far, I do want to talk about our advisory committee and its composition compared to what Oregon looks like. So you can see here on that left column there is the population of Oregon, what it looks like in terms of race, disability, age, whether or not they're renters or a homeowner, or their income. And you can see, it's just for information, right? And this is not unusual that we have a group of people who have the time and ability to provide input, who are wealthier, more likely to be homeowners, generally whiter than the population at large. It's not necessarily a bad thing. We just want to make sure that that's clear, and that everyone carries that with them as we move forward through this process. Anything else you want to say, Evan, on that? Or?
I think you captured it well.
So in terms of the operating principles, this is in item 4 of your packet on page 8. The operating principles is a pretty standard list. This is based on some of the principles we had with our rulemaking last couple of years, and that we've used, I think, for other rulemaking activities here at the department. Just take your time to familiarize yourself a little bit with some of those details. The principles talk about the committee's role, and I'll have another slide here that talks a little bit more detail about that. Talks about how the committee is going to make decisions, the structure of the committee, how we participate, the meetings, and just other kind of general guidelines for how our department expects rulemaking advisory committees to operate. In terms of the role of this committee, just to be very clear, this committee is advisory to us, it's the DLCD staff, and then we staff do make a recommendation to the commission at the end for rules that they adopt. Of course, the commission will have a hearing in July, and they will take oral and written testimony, and likely make a decision in November. That's the plan right now, about whether or not to adopt these rules or adopt the set of rules that we come up with. So that's the process. We expect this committee to advise us on the amended rules within the scope in order to meet the outcomes of the charge. Those are the lines, the box that the commission has given to us, and what they expect that we'll bring to them in July and November. So our role as staff is to develop that rule language for review. Absolutely, we're expecting to work with folks who have to deal with these rules all the time to make sure that we're getting something that makes sense. But we also have to make sure that we work with the Department of Justice basically on a weekly level to make sure that what we're doing is legal. There's just lots of different little boxes to check, and it's our job as DLCD staff to working for our commission to present them with rules that are adoptable, are legal, are within all those boxes that we need to be within. So just to be very clear about that. I think that was, I do have another slide in this about the technical advisory committee. So at the request of some stakeholders, and I believe there's local governments who've been plugged into this process, we were asked to convene a technical advisory committee. And this is pretty late breaking. We didn't really know about this request until relatively recently. So ideally we would have been a little bit clearer about this in the packet and information, but we didn't have that information yet. So this is an opportunity for, I'd say, local governments in particular, but it's not limited to local governments, but practitioners, folks who are really on the ground working with these rules to provide a greater level of detailed feedback to staff that might be available. We might be able to accommodate at the Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting. So we'll be talking a little bit more about when we're scheduling this first meeting. We're kind of on a fast timeline here, so we're going to try to make it work as best as we can. Our first meeting is going to be next week, a week from today. So open to all advisory committee members. We're also going to be sending an email out to every other affected jurisdiction that is affected by these rules, probably later today, I think, that invites them to this advisory committee. So we're trying to do the best we can to make sure that we have multiple avenues of opportunity for folks to be plugged in at the level of detail that makes sense for them, to make sure that we're putting together amendments within the scope of the rules that we're talking about, that get at what we're all trying to accomplish. So I think that's all I had for this piece of it. Any other questions?
So open it up to the rack. If anyone has any questions or thoughts, go ahead and raise your hand. I'll go to Ryan first here.
Yeah, thanks. So I just want to be clear, would it be appropriate for us to comment or bring up for discussion items that aren't specifically proposed for amendment in the packet?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have an opportunity for that. I'm sure we really made a space for that in this meeting or not, but there are, there's of course all the different rules that we have proposed for amendment. And if you're talking about something that would be separate from that, we will have a survey after this meeting that asks if there's any of those other things that we're not going to talk about today that you want to talk about. You can put that on that survey. In terms of rules that don't have a proposed amendment to that, we'll probably make a space somehow for folks to ask us about those or to talk about those later this week or at the technical advisory committee.
Thank you.
That's right. And Ariel?
Thanks. My question is actually really similar to Ryan. So I just want to say I really appreciate that response. That I was just going to say I really hoped that there would be opportunity to at least collect and understand and potentially dig into other items. I know that, again, LCDC gives you the direction of what we're working on, but I really hope that there is a process to elevate additional topics. So really glad to hear that there is that commitment to at least take that first step. So thanks for that.
Yes, absolutely. As you know, within the scope of what we've got, we absolutely have the ability to look at other items. And just to be clear, we did solicit very broadly earlier this year. I think it was January, February, comments or what are the other issues that folks might want to bring forward, and we did receive a number of them and incorporated them into that list, that scope that we put together. So and then I think also in April we had a list of things that we did receive that we didn't think really fit in that box, but I think some of those might be a little bit on the fence and we can talk about those.
And Leah?
Yeah, thanks. And apologize if I missed this, but is the technical advisory committee, the kind of scope and charge the same as this committee? Or is it more expansive in terms of what type of feedback you're looking for?
So for now, the way we've structured it, this is for this rulemaking process. That's not to say in the future that we couldn't have other processes where we have advisory committees of some sort that are looking at kind of those broader issues. But right now, we're keeping it within the scope of the rulemaking that we're undertaking right now.
Thanks for the question. Anyone else? Okay, if there are no other questions, then I'll hand it over to Matt to give a background presentation of the kind of process and high-level review of the rules here.
All right, good. Next slide. So in the process, that's really what I'm going to talk about mostly here. I'm hoping that most of what's on this slide is not new to people, these, except of course that tack on the second line there that Bill was just talking about. But the fact that we're having our RAC meeting today, because we are trying to respond very rapidly, schedule that technical meeting for next week so that it can fit in between the two meetings of the RAC, so that we can then bring whatever comes out of that technical meeting to the RAC meeting on June 12th. Then on July 28th is the public hearing on these rules. So bring all of your oral testimony to that. There will be time for some written testimony to come after that. That's really the focus for all the oral testimony in front of the commission then. Then some written testimony. Some other RAC meetings likely to be scheduled there in the August timeframe, so we can do some follow-up work from what is being heard at the LCDC meeting, and whatever the commission, if they give us some guidance and direction at that time, we can bring that back to this RAC group and quite likely some of the technical meetings as well. And then the commission is scheduled to be making a decision in early November. So in thinking about the drafts and the process, major rule drafts we're looking at here, you've seen one right now, the May 15th draft. That's what we're going to be using for today's RAC meeting. The technical group will be working with next week, and then the next RAC meeting, all based on that May 15th draft. Of course, we'll be sharing ideas back and forth as we go through here, but that would be the major draft. Then there would be a draft set of rules based on all that work that would go to the commission hearing in July. So we'll call that the commission hearing draft. And hopefully at that point, we've resolved a lot of things and we have a draft that is, I'm hoping, very close to final. Maybe we'll call it 99%. But of course, there's going to be testimony at the commission meeting and then written testimony afterwards. So there is quite possibly there'll be additional refinements, hopefully small refinements, that would then be brought and the commission would make the decision on that in November. So that is the schedule for the process. Go to the next slide. In terms of what we're doing with these first meeting here is having today, talking about the ideas, some of the adjustments and some of the significant clarifications. This is the 7 items that we did our best guess about which elements of this would be of most interest to you to discuss today. So we put them on there. But during this meeting, go ahead and tell us about other topics or more after the meeting, probably in the after meeting survey. Let us know if there's other places you want to talk about that. And so we can know what to schedule for that meeting number 2. It's really going to be up to what we hear at this meeting, perhaps additional discussion on some of these items or bringing in other topics for meeting number 2. And then the meeting number 3 yet to be scheduled would be that follow-up from the commission hearing. And you've probably all been waiting. What is these 7 items we were talking about? So here's the list. I'm not going to try to go over them in a lot of detail right now because the next part of our meeting is to step through each of these and give time for presentation and discussion. But these are the items that, based on our best guess, this is what we think is most worth discussing. So I can open it up here for questions on some of that process, but I would say not too many questions on these specific items. We'll get to each of these today. Hopefully we'll get to each of them at least.
Yes, yeah, we hope so. After we can do some Q&A here if you have any questions on the process and that timeline, and then after the break, really get into the substance of each of these 7, hopefully. So any questions from folks on that process timeline?
Maybe I could add one thing, and Matt, I think you touched on this, but what you saw on the schedule showed the first TAC meeting, the Technical Advisory Committee meeting. I think it's likely that we will have subsequent TAC meeting after the commission meeting to, based on the feedback that we get. We don't have that scheduled yet, so you don't see it yet. But if you're wondering about volunteering for the TAC, we're not talking just the one meeting. We're likely looking at some other meetings later on.
That's helpful. Thanks. Okay, well, let's take a quick break. We're a few minutes ahead of schedule. So let's get back together at 12:50. And then we'll dive into the first of the 7 topics here, the effective dates with major TSB updates, and then kind of try to get through all of them today and hear your input. So get back together at 12:50. Go ahead and stay on mute during the break. Feel free to turn your video off and listen then. All right, well, welcome back, folks. It's 12:50 here. Go ahead and get started again. Okay, so now we are going to get into the bulk of our meeting, which is going through these draft rule amendments that you just saw on the screen. So we'll go through the 7 topics, and I'll try to keep time here so that we can hopefully get to as many of these as we can. We know that some may need more discussion, and that's fine, but maybe try for about 15 to 20 minutes per topic. And if we're spending too much time on it, we might ask folks to provide additional comments in the post-meeting survey or as a TAC topic for that June 1st meeting. So as you listen to these topics, we really want you to be thinking about, do these changes make sense to you? Do they seem implementable for local jurisdictions? Any concerns? And if you do have concerns, of course, it's always most helpful if you can provide proposed modifications rather than, pointing out the problem, kind of what's a proposed solution, what would make it better without getting into wordsmithing. We can always work on that offline. And if we get to some rules and you say, yep, that change really makes sense, just a simple thumbs up in the reactions icon is always really helpful too, just to get a sense if this is working for people, which, if you go to that reactions button at the bottom, you can find the thumbs up there. So with that, our staff here each kind of are tag teaming these slides, but I'll hand it over to Bill to go through the first rule, which is 0012, I think, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Sylvia. Again, Bill Holmstrom, you'll see the staff to talk about Rule 12 to start here. Just so folks, let's make sure I get, there we go, Rule 12. All right, so Rule 12 has to do with kind of the interim time that we're in now, since the rules have been adopted, to the future when everyone's kind of has an adopted transportation system plan that meets all the updated requirements. There's a time of transition where some things are new, some things are still the previous way things were. So as much as possible, we're trying to ease in a way that makes sense for folks, and that's what the changes here are about. That's rules about, and that's what the changes are about. It's really trying to make that transition work in a way that makes sense. So the major change to this rule that I want to highlight today, there are a number of changes to this rule, but the major one is we are proposing to line up 2 effective dates with the adoption of a major TSP update. So that means that instead of these dates that are written into the rule, one rule would be June 30th, 2025, and the other would be 2024. We'd say at the time that any jurisdiction does a TSP update, then that's when that rule comes into effect. For these rules in particular, it just makes sense that they're a little bit tied together. Rule 210 has to do with transportation performance standards, and it doesn't really make sense to line those up with when you're not doing a TSP update. You want to adopt those at the same time you're doing a transportation system plan update. So it really makes sense to do that. And then 215 is kind of attached to that in terms of, or to turn these around, 215 has to do with transportation performance standards, and 210 is attached to it. So we just want to make sure that that this kind of lines up with the TSP. It just makes a lot more sense. During the alternative dates process, when folks asked us for alternative dates, a number of jurisdictions asked us to line up 215 with a TSP update anyway. So we saw that. In fact, in our guidance, we suggested that local governments do that. And so we said to ourselves, well, geez, why don't we just say like that's when you can do it? So this, I don't think it should help local governments, lines things up nicely, undertaking a transportation system plan process anyway, where you're going to be looking at updated transportation performance standards. So that's the change that we're making here. I will highlight a few other changes in this rule that are a little bit smaller. In section 3, which talks about the alternative dates process. As part of that temporary rules, we removed the deadline for requesting those alternative dates. There was previously a deadline of January 30th or 31st, the last day of January, this year to do that. So that had already passed. We heard from some jurisdictions like, gosh, maybe we do want to make some changes here, ask for some different dates. So we've already received a few requests since the temporary rules came into effect. So there is no longer a deadline for requesting alternative dates. It's the same process and criteria that our director uses to review those alternative date requests, but and the dates that can be changed are all still the same, but just the deadline for when you have to ask is not there anymore. In subsection 4D of the rule, we made some clarifications for some requirements that apply to the Portland metropolitan area. I believe these have to do with regional centers and when those are adopted. Is that correct, Kevin? I
believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so pretty minor thing there. In section 5 of the rule, there are some dates that have already passed, and they aren't in section 5. Those aren't dates that can be changed through the alternative dates process. So those rules, the dates have already passed. They just are effective. So we didn't feel it was necessary to keep those in the rule any longer. So those have been deleted. And then in subsection 5C, we clarified that let's see, the updated TSP is not required to expand. So yeah, this has to do with this interim time when we know that folks are going to be updating TSPs at different times along the way. There was kind of an unintended consequence of the way we wrote our rule about urban growth boundary expansions that kind of assumed that everyone had the chance to do that full major TSP update to meet the updated rules. Not necessarily the case. There's potentially some UGB expansions that are going to be coming up sooner than that, so that a jurisdiction would be required to or would be doing a TSP update. So we didn't want to stand in the way of those. That wasn't the intent of the rule. So we just clarified the existing acknowledged TSP under the previous set of rules. That's fine moving forward with your UGB expansion. So you have to meet, of course, the range of other requirements in other parts of the or you doing a UGB expansion anyway. But this rule, it wasn't intended to be something that you had to do an updated TSP in advance to do that in the next few years. So that's what those pieces are. Any questions or comments that folks have about Rule 12?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So feel free to raise your hand if you've got any comments. See a hand up from Jessica, and also a reminder just to say your name and organization, especially if we're getting to know each other. Go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you. Jessica Pels, Washington County. We had some questions specifically about 4D, about adopting the Region 2040 Center and land use regulations. And with the sentence that was added to 4D upon adoption of a Region 2040 Center and land use regulations. So that my first question is upon local government adoption or upon Metro adoption of the Region 2040 Center and land use regulations. And then local governments must ensure that all applicable provisions of this division are met. That means the entirety of 660.12, or does it mean within subsection 12? And then it says, because it says then including OAR 660.12, 415 and 435. So we've got a couple of questions about that clause that was added. And then the date is within the UGB county with planning jurisdiction, et cetera, shall comply with the adopted requirements of the urban growth management functional plan by December 31st, 2025. So in Washington County, we know we need to adopt the Raleigh Hills Town Center. I'm not sure that we can do it by 2025 without funding to do so, because it will be a big lift. It has the Beaverton Hillsdale Olson Shoals intersection. It's a huge transportation improvement project that needs a lot of looking at. And then we want to do a whole NEPA analysis to qualify for future federal funding there. So to adopt the Raleigh Hills Town Center, we could potentially just adopt the boundary, but to do the whole plan with the whole land use plan and transportation plan for the town center is going to be a bigger lift. So just looking for some guidance there.
Or
Yeah.
Kevin,
Yeah.
just don't unmute myself. Okay.
Yeah, right.
So I'm sure you don't have feedback here. Okay.
Yeah.
So a couple pieces here. I'm gonna first of all talk about the date and the dates that are in the rule. This is in section 4 of the rule, which are all dates that may be modified through the alternative dates process. So if for some reason the county's not able to adopt the Raleigh Hills Town Center by 2025, the county could modify your request to ask for more time for doing that. So that's an option that's available. As far as the substance of the rule or the change, I'm gonna hand it over to Kevin to talk about it a little bit.
Sure, and I might actually dish it a little bit to Evan, but the change in section 4D of this rule is really referring specifically to the timing of the local government action. So when they adopt center boundaries, land use regulations that implement those town or regional centers, then currently local governments must ensure all applicable provisions of this division. Applicable provisions are defined here in terms of, you know, what the triggers are and when, but explicitly linking to rules 415 and 435 as they relate to parking. And Evan knows in more detail what those particular rules speak to, but I don't know that if we want to go into that level.
No, 415 is about parking maximums, as I'm sure you know, Jessica, but to make sure, and 435 is about parking reform in those areas we want parking reform, and they may already be covered in transit corridors, but it's the climate friendly area parking reforms. So kind of stronger than some other areas. So trying to make sure that yeah, as that map evolves, that those standards are adopted concurrently.
Well, I guess a follow-up question, and maybe this is for Tom also from Metro, is can we adopt the boundary and maybe apply 415 and 435 for the Raleigh Hills Town Center, for example, without doing the entire process, so that we could get in there with the date, meeting the date, and then look for funding to do the overall more robust town center planning in compliance with the urban growth management functional plan?
Tom had to step away. This is Kim Ellis, also with Metro. So I think that's something that we that seems reasonable to allow for a two-step process if that's acceptable to DLCD staff.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that is going to be Metro's. It's the functional plan that guides how that works. So our rules don't play a part in that piece, but it seems reasonable to me as well.
But Bill, I think you made the point that the alternative dates process would allow for flexibility here as well.
Yeah, so does that help answer the question, Jessica, and any kind of other issues to flag with the rules changes here?
I think it does, as long as Metro has the discretion, because it's putting it into the administrative rule that within the Metro urban growth boundary, the county has to comply with the adopted requirements of the urban growth management functional plan. So giving that authority to Metro. So as long as Metro has that discretion to, I guess, work Metro and DLCD together to amend that date, then we could have asked for that, for a modification to that date.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks for chiming in, Kim. Appreciate that. And let's go to Michael and then to Skylar.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Michael Anderson with Sightline Institute. I'm also part of the Climate Action Coalition, and I'm subbing for Mary Kyle from Friends. Quick question about change to Rule 3, the alternative dates. Are we reading this correctly, that it lets cities go to 2029 without submitting any work plan, in theory?
Oh, I don't need to unmute. Okay, sorry. Thank you, Michael. Bill Holmstrom again. So this is a change that was made as part of the temporary rules when we updated the rule to allow local governments. We got rid of the requirement for the deadline for applying for an alternative date. We were looking at that section, and the provision that allowed local governments to only ask for a date out as far as 2027. Didn't really make sense when you started looking at the TSP and all the things that are connected to the TSP, when we're allowing up to 2029 for the transportation system plan amendment for most jurisdictions. It didn't really, it was a little bit silly, and we were getting requests that were asking for June 30th, 2027, because that's the latest date they could ask for. And they actually needed probably a little bit more time on certain pieces of it because they wanted to line it up with their TSP. Now, some of the changes that we're making to 215 and 210, I think will fix some of that piece, but we just want to line things up a little bit more and not throw in another date that we want to make sure that we're ensuring urgency, and that's something that our director looks at when she's reviewing the requests. But again, the requests have to come in from the jurisdiction. It has to be approved by our director, whether that's an initial request or a modification of the original request. Those do have to be approved, and we have to review a set of criteria that includes, looking at urgency as part of that. So we feel pretty comfortable with making that change to just make it a little bit clearer and still making sure that folks are, moving along quickly. In terms of like what you said, that work plan, we don't use that terminology for. We use that terminology in Division 44. So I just want to make sure that we're just talking about the alternative dates. If that's what you're asking about in Division 12, then again, it's something that's approved by our director.
Thank you. I think my sense of our coalition perspective is that it is useful to force people to think about difficult things well in advance of having to do the difficult things. And we have not been succeeding. We've been missing our goals because these things are difficult. And so we need to ensure that there's institutionalization and institutionalized pressure to force the difficult things to keep happening. So some sort of half measure between 2023, which we've always agreed is pretty early, and 2029, seems like there ought to be some mid-measure in there. Anyway, I'll flag that for further discussion, and thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. And Skylar?
I just want to echo a little bit what Jessica already said about 4D. I would encourage you all to be really explicit about what you mean when you say that all applicable provisions of this division must be met. And partially because there's going to be disparate impacts in the metro region. Some cities like Tigard have already adopted our 2040 centers. Some cities haven't. And so I wouldn't want to see a situation where arbitrarily a city that is having to go through that process to adopt a 2040 center is going through a higher bar, going over a higher bar than we would be held to. And then the other thing about that just relates to clarifying, and this is a pretty consistent comment that I have in my written comments throughout the changes, is just being really explicit about do the rules apply in sections on adoption of a 2040 center or a climate friendly area, or adoption or amending. I think the amending piece is maybe not as clear, and maybe you intend to say amending as part of adopting, but I would just make that very explicit.
Thank you for the comment, Skylar. Okay, well, appreciate that. And of course, we'll take DLCD will take additional comments through the post-meeting survey. Let's see if we can get into another topic here. So the next rule is 210, and I'll hand it over to Bill to walk through this one.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm going to talk a little bit about Rule 210. This rule is about transportation modeling and analysis, and the proposed changes to the rule narrow its applicability. Say the way the rule is written right now, it's been adopted by the Commission last year, was very broadly written, very general, applies potentially across a wide variety of applications, which I'd say in conversations with local government staff, I think they come up with some examples which depending on how you read the rule could be implicated, and I don't think they're necessarily intended to be implicated. So I think we wanted to be clearer about and more detailed about the applicability of when this applies in terms of which land use decisions the rule applies to and which types of modeling activities the rule applies to. So it's really about, this is after many conversations with local governments, with, I think, valid concerns about kind of the broad scope of the rule. We want to make sure that we're tackling this. Now, this is our first stab at amendments to this rule. I expect this will be, we'll have additional conversations on the ins and outs of what this looks like, and look forward to having those conversations. So I don't know how much time I'll be able to spend today, but I would not be surprised if this is something that the TAC takes up, and that we also may bring up in future interactive meetings as well. So just do want to note, as I mentioned before when I was talking about Rule 12, we are changing the effective date of this rule to line up with the transportation system plan. So there's also kind of a, it's not coming at us as quickly as it was originally planned to, which may have been next year, about a year from now. So we don't have quite that coming at us. And then the whole other piece with this rule in particular is we know that there's additional resources that need to be brought to bear here, and that ODOT is working on. We've got folks working at ODOT on this rule and what it means, and some of the tools that local governments will need to use in order to successfully implement this rule. So those are in progress, and they're not here right now, but they are working on it, and we know that there's interest from the Department of Transportation to make this work as well.
Okay, thanks, Bill. So we'll open it up to comments on this one, and I already see 2 hands up. So let's go to Joseph and then to Matt. Joseph, over to you.
Hi, this is Joseph Off of the city of Hillsborough. I first want to say that I'm glad to see the changes in this rule. It's definitely an improvement than with the previous writing. The one question I have is that I could see us, the city, when we do a legislative comprehensive plan amendment, we can easily do this. But I guess my question is regarding quasi-judicial, which is a developer-initiated comprehensive plan amendment. Usually, like when we deal with those, or sometimes they have the consultants and everything they need, but sometimes they don't, and so it could be a big challenge for them. And I can't really, I know Kim's on this call from Metro, I can't speak, but my understanding there's like a line of modeling to the MPO. We rely on Metro to do that modeling to tell us the BMT per capita. So I just curious, like I could see like us as a city, we can phrase our timeline so we can make sure we counter put that in our scheduling, that wait for Metro to do the modeling. But for somebody who's trying to do a developer who's trying to do a comprehensive plan amendment, they don't really understand that challenge. And so I'm just curious of how you're going to approach this for quasi-judicial comprehensive plan amendments.
Thank you, Joseph. I think that's something that we're going to have to maybe discuss a little bit more. I don't know. I was looking over the coding. He's just like, don't talk to me. I think this is also, ODOT is developing tools that will be available to not just local governments, but would be also be useful for, say, consultant community that works on, existing amendments like this. There's already requirements to say Rule 60 that, or other local requirements that might be in place where you have consultants that have to do that transportation analysis work for local governments because of the requirements. They do it on behalf of their clients, their the public sector, or private sector, I should say, because of the local or the local requirements on behalf of because of the state requirements. So I think there's a pathway there, but I think that does require some more conversation. And I would like so we've got an ODOT engineer who's very smart on these things, who's working on some of these, and I think maybe we have some further conversation on that.
Thanks, Joseph and Bill. Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Matt Brinkley, City of Medford. And so the way I understand this in relation to 1212 is that we don't have to apply this way of analyzing these kinds of land use decisions until after we have completed a major TSP amendment. So it's no longer June of 2024 or whatever the date was. Is that correct?
Correct, that's our proposal, yes.
Okay, and so I think that that's an improvement. So I guess my question is, you say that it's been changed to address the kind of broad, overly broad, maybe application of modeling to certain kinds of land use decisions. But it's not clear to me what kinds of land use decisions this wouldn't apply to. So could you maybe explain that and tell me how the proposed wording sort of narrows that application?
Sure, yeah, thank you. So I'll just give you some examples of things that people brought to us. The way it was written before, I had it in front of me, I guess, thank you. It said before that it just used the term land use decision and did not specifically identify which types of land use decisions it was talking about. And I think folks were concerned that potentially development review decisions could be subject to this. So one example was, gosh, every time we do site distance review for a driveway approach or something like that, is that something that we would need to apply this analysis to? And that seemed wildly out of scope to us. It didn't really make sense to do it that way. I think mostly fell into the buckets of development review, whether it's kind of that engineering kind of look at things or kind of the TIA level or something like that. It just it's the transportation planning rules. That's what I always like to say. They're not the transportation development review rules. We're supposed to be kind of at a higher level, so we just wanted to be very clear that's the level of land use decisions that we're talking about.
Thanks, Bill. And Matt, did that answer the question?
I think so. I'll probably provide additional comments.
All right, we'll take additional comments. And just a reminder too, if you're hearing this and this rule change makes sense, it's always helpful to kind of get a thumbs up if that's all you want to say, just so we have a sense if this is making sense to people. But otherwise, we'll just keep going with some questions and comments. Over to Jessica of Washington County.
Thank you, Jessica Pels, Washington County. And actually, I think this would be a good for a clarification of what the TAC will be doing, but the RAC will not, because if this is something that would be addressed in the TAC, that's great, because I think that we are also concerned about the wording of land use decisions because it has a statutory meaning. And so it seems weird that the number one rule says it applies to XYZ, but then it continues to use that wording land use decision throughout that section. And that's a little bit confusing. And then we're also kind of concerned about the wording of the new subsection 5 about the land use decision may include actions to reduce vehicle miles traveled per capita, instead of saying something like conditions of approval and what those might be and how that all plays out in actual implementation. So I guess my question is, if this will be addressed at the TAC, I'd like to learn more about that. And so again, how that interplay works. Do you need all our technical comments now as part of the RAC, or will this be something we can work on in the TAC that will come back to the RAC? A lot of acronyms there too, but yeah, some clarification would be appreciated.
Yeah. Don't mute myself. Okay, I'm sorry. You couple of years of doing this, you get used to pushing that button. Sorry about that. So the TAC concept is a little new to us as well. We're trying to figure out exactly what makes sense. There is going to be a survey that comes out right after this meeting today that covers all these rules that we're talking about today, and also all the other rules that we are contemplating making amendments to. And we want folks to give us feedback about where are the areas that you would like to focus and talk about. We're going to be able to take that input next week and figure out what makes sense to talk about with the Technical Advisory Committee next week, and then also program out our next Rulemaking Advisory Committee as well. I think our thought is, and the input that we've received is that practitioners in particular would like a little bit more opportunity to really get their fingers dirty, get in there, get in the weeds. And this rule is probably a perfect opportunity to do that There's probably some other rules that fit that description as well. And that's what that TAC is for. It's not quite so formal as expect. It's just a little bit different, probably vibe to that in terms of just a little bit more in the weeds. And the Rulemaking Advisory Committee being a little bit higher level and probably not as much opportunity to get into the very deepest details that the Technical Advisory Committee would be able to do. That's how I see it. Folks in the room, that sound about right?
Yep.
Great. So, and of course, if it'll depend a little bit on the interests of the folks that are members of that group, what they're interested in, what they'd like to do. We are providing this opportunity on the request of stakeholders, and so we just want to make sure that it's going to be valuable to folks that ask for that.
Jessica, does that answer the question? Thank you. Ariel, I saw your hand come down, so maybe you have the same question.
I think Bill just actually answered what I was going to request, which was that I encourage you to defer to the participants in the TAC on topics that might be covered. I think the survey will be a helpful tool, but it would be great if it's not just staff driven, what topics are included in the TAC conversations.
Thanks, Ariel. All right, others, any other comments and questions on Rule 210 here? Well, if not, we'll go to the next set of rules. And so now it's over to Kevin to go through some of the climate friendly area rules here.
Yeah, I guess it is. All right. Well, good afternoon, folks. I'm Kevin Young with DLCD. So we've made some changes, and these changes were all made in the temporary rules that were adopted. So these rules are actually now in effect, and this is our opportunity to, if we didn't quite get it right, or there may be some tweaks that are warranted, then let's figure those out through this process. So kind of broad brush, the changes that we made to rules 0315 and 0320 began with clarifying that a housing needs analysis or a housing capacity analysis, either one, as long as it's adopted and acknowledged, is an acceptable document to use to establish that 30% total housing number that's necessary to establish climate friendly areas. I know that this has been an issue we've been talking about. Hopefully we've gotten this language correct. The language that you'll see in the rule is written specifically to not identify housing capacity analyses, which is an animal that came about post House Bill 2003 in 2019, or housing needs analyses. Rather, we're describing both of those things, both of those documents. One, it could be an old one, or it could be one that was just done last year. Either one will work for this purpose. Other changes we made in Rule 315, just generally clarifying some requirements for CFA designation. We've received comments that, hey, some of the stuff is really confusing, we're not tracking it, so I don't need to go into the specific edits unless there's interest in doing so, but clarifications to that process. The other change that we made in 0315 is to simplify the process for the adoption of climate friendly areas. So the way it was written in the old rule basically required local governments to develop and adopt a climate friendly element to their comprehensive plans. So like, I think a lot of folks who read that rule were like, wow, I got to develop a whole chapter on climate change and put that into my comp plan. That's a lot more than just dealing with climate friendly areas. And so we have written this much more generally to allow a variety of lesser lifts for local government adoption. So what basically is constituted is, adoption of maps, development standards that consist or comply with the climate friendly area requirements. The last change that we've made is to provide a clearer option for the outcome-oriented standards path. You may remember, some of you who were involved with the initial rulemaking, that we had two ways for local governments to determine how they wanted to regulate development in climate-friendly areas. The first one was the prescriptive path, that utilize minimum residential densities and allowed building heights. That's one path. The other was an outcome-oriented approach that really spoke to development codes that allowed for certain level of housing and employment in those climate-friendly areas. So as we started to, look at the work that local governments are doing as part of their CFA study work, we realized, gee, everybody's going with the prescriptive path. And kind of drill down a little bit on why is that? And I think what we heard is the outcome-oriented standard, as it was written, was very challenging for people to figure out, like, okay, how do I meet that test? It seems kind of open-ended. Can we put that in clearer terms? And so what I think the changes that we've made to this section really simplify it quite a bit. And essentially the burden of proof is for local governments to determine or to show that their development regulations will allow for development of certain square footages per net acre within those areas. So I believe those levels are 60,000, 90,000, or 120,000 square feet per net acre, based on your set of development regulations. And if you think about, net acres 43,560 square feet, 60,000 square feet within a net acre is, maybe a two-story building. So the intensity of development per these standards could be quite a bit less. Anyway, what we tried to do is to provide another alternative path that local governments can use in addition to the prescriptive path which provided before. So I'm happy to answer any questions about those rules or hear any concerns with what's there.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
Yeah, so members of the committee, if you have any questions or comments, kind of wanting to hear if these changes make sense or if you have any concerns or proposed edits. Go ahead and raise your hand. I see a hand up from Matt.
Thanks, Matt Brinkley, City of Medford. So Kevin, this kind of shifts the conversation for the performance or outcome-based approach from this analysis of number of units and jobs to really just looking at kind of the built form, the amount of building that can be achieved within a CFA. Is that a good way to characterize this?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay. I think that's the only comment I have, except there's a typo in 9 parens, little a.
All right, I'll take a look at that.
There should be an or instead of an of before at least 60,000 square feet.
Got it. Appreciate that. So just to kind of follow up on your question. So basically we did the math behind the jobs and housing units per acre and figured out, like, okay, so if we're looking at a typical office use, what's a square footage ballpark for an employment use that would house 40 employees, in addition to the 900 square foot average dwelling unit size. Just crunch the numbers on that. And that's where we came up with, let's just look at square footage, buildable square footage.
And so, Kevin, it seems like the 3 categories kind of roughly correspond to an FAR of like 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1, and then 3 to 1. Is that kind of the way the math works out, sort of?
I suppose so. I mean, the thing that factors in here is whatever your development standards are impact your buildable net area. So if you have open space requirements or setbacks, that's going to reduce, the buildable area per floor. So yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And Matt, with those clarifications from Kevin, is this rule kind of making sense? Is this a change that you think is acceptable? Any concerns?
I think this is an improvement over the previous performance-based standard.
Great, that's helpful. Others, any other questions, comments? All right, well, we are kind of flying through these.
All right.
So let's go to the next set of rules, and I think it's over to Bill again.
Thank you, Sylvia. So again, Bill Holmstrom. A little bit about Rule 325, and this is also related to climate-friendly areas. This has to do with how you review climate-friendly areas, whether you're adopting a climate-friendly area at the beginning or you're making amendments in a climate-friendly area in the future. And this applies to both climate-friendly areas in the 7 metropolitan areas that aren't Portland, but also within the Portland metropolitan area, those Region 2040 centers. It also applies to those areas as well. And this replaces the longstanding requirements in Rule 60 that folks are probably mostly familiar with on this call, but I'll briefly summarize what that requires. The idea is, you do all your planning up front. That's the TPR's idea is you do coordinated land use and transportation planning. You figure out what your land uses are, you figure out what the transportation system is that you need to have to serve those land uses. Rule 60 says, well, if you come in later and you want to make a change to that land use plan, whether that's a comprehensive plan or a zone map change or something like that, then you go and you take a look at that transportation system and the way it's been, when it's written, the case law that's on top of it has come. It's a pretty substantial process now to determine whether or not there's what's called a significant effect on the transportation system. And if there is what's determined to be a significant effect, there's multiple ways of determining how to remedy that significant effect. And sometimes that leads to outcomes which aren't necessarily what we're looking for, particularly in a climate-friendly area. If you're talking about, geez, the problem is that we have too many cars turning left in the intersection during a certain hour of the day, and we need to put an extra turn lane in there. That's not necessarily the same type of investment that we're looking for in a climate-friendly area. Not to say that you couldn't do that necessarily, depending on the context, but that's not necessarily what we're looking for. So Rule 325 is a different paradigm. It's really saying, we know that these are places where we would like to have concentrated, walkable, mixed-use development patterns. It's not the most important thing for motor vehicle traffic to be able to move through here quickly. That's not the most important value in these places. It's important that we have investments in walking and cycling and transit in these places. So we've kind of changed how folks figure this out. There's no longer an analysis of any sort that's required. It's really just summarizing what are the walking, cycling, and transit facilities that are available in these places now. What are the gaps? Identify those gaps in those networks in the climate-friendly area or in the Region 2040 Center, and then just identify those. And ideally, later on, there would be a transportation system planning process, which would then take that information and use that as part of that process to identify investments and prioritize investments in growth areas. So that's what the point of the rule is to do. The way we wrote the rule, frankly, it kind of evolved over time, and we never came back and really fixed it up in a way that made it very easy to read. It was pretty complicated how it was written before. And we think it accomplished what it needed to accomplish, but you really had to say, well, what about this and this points over here? And it was a little confusing. So we wanted to restructure the rule. We didn't really want to substantively change it too much, but we really wanted to make sure that it was clear, like what we're supposed to do. Some of these conversations come from ODOT in particular. There's some elements where if there's a state highway that's nearby, depending on the situation, there's some additional summarization that's necessary of what potential impact could be on the state highway. Again, no remedies are necessarily required because of this rule. It's just really identification of potential issues or impact on the state highway, and they wanted to be clear. We wanted to be clear about when that's necessary, what those entail, and so that's what the point of most of the changes in this rule are. When sections 1 through 5, it's really just to restructure it and make it clear and not change too much. Section 6 we did add that talks about what happens if you have an amendment. And this could happen where you essentially have a text amendment that changes the land use regulation, for example. that has application both inside and outside of a CFA or a 2040 center. What do you do in that case? Do you do both? Do you do one or the other? And so we provided two options there. You say you can either try to split those out geographically and say in the center you use 325 and outside you use Rule 60, or you can just use 60 for everything if you want to. I'm absolutely open to hearing other ideas from folks on how best to handle that situation. I will say since this the set of amendments has come out, I've had the opportunity to have a discussion with a jurisdiction in the Portland metropolitan area. Someone's actually on the call today. So you identify yourself if you like. The city is looking at a number of existing town center, existing regional center, who are looking at some amendments to plan amendments, and there's just some edge cases there, I think, and some little pieces there that I think we also want to smooth over. So this is something where I think we will be taking some additional looks and making some additional tweaks as well. So I gave a lot of background information there. I'm very happy. Skylar's raising his hand. That's great. Thank you, Skylar. And happy to open it up.
That's great. And so open it up for questions, comments, or other ideas. Like Bill said, if an amendment has application both inside and outside the CFA. Skylar, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I realized I forgot to identify myself in my first comment. So Skylar Warren, City of Tigard. Again, it's hard for me to know where to delineate where I should bring these to the TAC or the RAC, but in the same comment, maybe clarifying that this is adopt or amend. And then I think as we've delved into this, and I'll identify us as the city who's going through this right now, in 5B, we feel like there's some really great description and sideboards on a lot of the analysis in most of the rules. And this is one where the wording seems to leave it open to a pretty expansive reading of things. So additional motor vehicle traffic generation, so trip generation during the planning period, which is a pretty long period, considering all the various land uses that might come into an area that has very intentionally flexible opportunities for mixed use, residential, commercial. That study in and of itself, without some better sideboards, could actually, in some cases, I think, be more difficult than following the typical TPR analysis. So it might be that I'm just too much of a novice in this area around TPR analysis, but we've really kind of had some challenges wrapping our heads around exactly what this would mean in the 2040 centers. One last comment. There's I think for us still a question of nexus. So say you have your 2040 center, it has an intersection with that quarter-mile radius around a ramp, but you're not really doing work in that area. You're just doing work in the climate-friendly area, maybe a mile away. Do you have to do the analysis for the area that's a mile away just because there's an overlap in one portion of the 2040 center or CFA? Anyway, those are my comments. Thanks.
So much, Skylar.
Yeah, thank you, Skylar. I'd say our conversation the other day, was very useful to help understand, I think, some of the edges we're running up against here. I will say, we're working closely with ODOT on a couple of things just to make sure that we have clear rules here. I would say that the highway impact analysis piece or highway impact summary piece of this is important to ODOT and the state highways, and we want to make sure that we're respecting that and working with them closely on that. I think they also intend to put together some additional, I think, guidance on that and what that looks like, and so we'll definitely be working with them on that. In addition to any amendments we make.
Let's go. Okay, and I see Jessica's hand up. And then, folks that we haven't heard from yet, committee members, encourage you to chime in if there's anything you want to add for this rule, any questions or comments. But I'll go to Jessica first.
Thank you, Jessica Pellis, Washington County. Well, first we wanted a +1 to Skylar's comments about within the Region 2040 Center. So curiously following along with that. And then I had a couple of comments. One, we'd like to suggest that the title changes also to say transportation review and climate friendly areas and Region 2040 centers, to be clear, because since the previous climate friendly areas of 310 and 315 don't apply, or 320 don't apply to us in the Portland metro area. So just to make that clear that this section does apply. Just wanted to make a note about consistency of use of terms throughout of the highway impact summary, multimodal transportation summary, multimodal transportation gap summary, just so that these terms are all used consistently and we know what they mean. And then I had a question about whether subsection 5 applied to Region 2040 centers as well as climate friendly areas. That's just the one section that doesn't say climate friendly area and Region 2040 centers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those are all good comments. And I would say Region 5, or Section 5, I think is intended to apply to Region 2040 centers as well, but it should say that. Great.
Great, thanks for pointing that out. Others, any other questions or comments here? Okay, well, let's get to another set of rules here, and then maybe after that we can take a break and then continue with the rules and see if there's additional comments and keep going with the meeting. So next set of rules is over to Evan to talk about parking.
Thanks, Sylvia. So we tweaked a few things in the parking rules. We thought that two that might be of most interest to folks were things that we did. And some of this was in the temporary rulemaking in April, and some of it's follow on. So one big area that we're proposing changes in is the 405 sub 4, which is kind of dealing with large parking lots. Large parking lots obviously have climate impacts and equity impacts and walkability impacts. So we wanted to do something on it. In that section, we proposed to kind of clarify that the options for doing something in large parking lots, that those buildings that are subject to the Department of Energy's green energy technology investments don't need to be there. That's the 330 reference, the OAR 330 reference. So did that. We also heard from our local government partners that questions about, hey, what about partial redevelopments? This mall, this new building is going on, and we want to be really clear that you don't have to retrofit the whole mall parking lot just if you're doing one building in one area of the mall or something like that. That this is about the additional parking that's added with new developments. So really trying to focus on that part of large new parking lots. We also proposed and adopted, the commission adopted in April, some adjustments to the tree provisions. We found that the 50% coverage option was too much of a stretch, and we moved that down to 40%. And we also heard from local government partners that this distinction about requiring trees along driveways versus drive aisles folks wanted an option to that. So we took the option of, hey, if you've got 30% overall, don't worry about what a driveway and a drive aisle is. So did that in response to feedback. And the last thing we did in large parking lots is kind of say, hey, let's really focus on the pedestrian connections. For a long time, the transportation planning rules have talked about street-like design and features, and we're really just trying to make sure people can safely get from building entrance to pedestrian facilities, sidewalks adjacent to the building, or the site. So that's what we did with 405, along with some other language cleanup. I'll cover 440 as well and then take questions overall. With 440, which is the parking reform near transit, this was a question that we heard a fair amount as people were trying to figure out how to implement it was transit services change. Do we have to just constantly amend our development regulations? How do we deal with that? So we tried to draft an option that said, hey, you can adopt development maps and regulations once a year. And if you've adopted within the last year, you can rely on that. You don't have to check your transit schedules every time someone comes in with a development application. So that's really the main thing we did with 440, along with kind of truing up some language and making it more parallel, aligned with the guidance that we've been providing and that sort of stuff, but just trying to be legally more parallel so people don't assume there was different intent in some sections. So that's high level what we're proposing to do on those two rules. Happy to take questions or comments.
Thanks, Evan. So just go ahead and raise your hand if you have any questions or comments here. If you want to chime in on if these make sense or if you have any suggested changes. See a lot of hands on this one. So let's go. I'm going to move around a little bit because we haven't heard from Neil. So I'm going to go to Neil and Ann first and then get to the other hands.
Great, thanks. Neil Bonsgard, the Environmental Center. I was just curious in 4E, there was a removal of local codes must provide clear and objective standards to achieve canopy, along with some species requirements. But I'm just curious to know what the justification was, particular for removing that component of the clear and objective standards to achieve canopy.
Yeah, we heard from local governments that there was heartburn on that. Those folks trying to implement how do I write around that and things. And we thought that the other standards in the rule got us close enough to that we didn't want to hold feet to the fire. Brian, I saw you came off on camera. Do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just a point of clarification there. Ryan Markwart with DLCD, kind of helping out with the rules drafting. Obviously, the clear and objective standards still apply to residential development. By removing this section, it's kind of recognizing that clear and objective standards don't have to apply to non-residential development. So by removing that, we're still allowing local codes to say things that are not clear and objective as it applies to commercial, institutional, those types of development. Whereas if that was left in the rule, it would have required clear and objective standards for those. So it was kind of rolling that back. It still applies to residential, but not a requirement per rule now for those other types of development. Hopefully that clarifies it a little bit.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. And Neil, hearing that clarification, does this kind of rule change make sense to you? Does it an improvement? Any concerns?
I don't know. I'll follow up if I have concerns. Yeah,
that's fine. It's just always helpful to hear kind of where people are on these. So thanks, appreciate that. Let's go to Ann.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about 4B, the modifications to that, and how, because it now says provide either trees along driveways or a minimum of 30% tree canopy. So if someone provides solar panels, I mean, B is separate from A, which requires the 40% canopy or solar panels. So I'm just not sure how to apply the changes in B. And then I had a question about C, pedestrian facilities between building entrances and pedestrian facilities in the adjacent public right-of-way. I understand that, but it sort of leaves out the safe pedestrian connections throughout the parking lot. So some driveways are not going to just be along, the buildings. So I just wasn't sure if you meant to just include between the building entrances and the public street, which hopefully the buildings are close to the public street, or should we have some pedestrian facility within the parking lot, especially larger parking lots?
Yeah, Thank you, and I appreciate those questions and comments. Certainly open to that adjustment to see and can offer a proposal back to the RAC and the TAC in future meetings. That's good feedback. I think that we have heard moving backwards. We have gotten the question since the commission adopted the temporary rules that if people are meeting the 4A requirement through providing 40% tree canopy, do they automatically get some B or the 30%? And the answer is yes. The 30% was just kind of an easier way for some local governments to measure. The 40% is an optional approach. And the thought is both with the 30% and the 40% that enough of that will cover the major thoroughfares and the major travel things, which is what we're trying to get at with the driveways versus drive aisles thing. So if you've got enough trees there, we think you'll be good. There was a third thing I think that you brought up. I was trying to listen and take notes, and yeah, but I'm happy to have a follow-up conversation with you, and if it becomes clear, great. If we can further clarify and tweak the language, that's why we're here with the Rulemaking Advisory Committee to so we can get that right. So thank you for that. Was there a third thing that I didn't address, Anne? I'm sorry.
No, I just think it's still really confusing how if you chose for A or B, A or B, how 4B applies. I just think there's not a connection between 4AC and then 4B. It's just not clear at all. But that I don't have a third item just to answer your question, but I'll try to write some comments.
Maybe we'll restructure this so it's clearer. And yes, it's frustrating that there are A's and B's all over the place. Some A, some B. So yeah. So thanks for the feedback.
Thank you. All right, Michael, over to you, and then Skylar.
Yeah, thanks. Michael Anderson with Sightline. It seems like to me that there are two different problems that you could potentially be trying to solve with this set of edits. One is to make things easier to build for people who are trying to build things, and one is to try and make the oversight process and compliance process for the cities easier by making the requirements on the cities simpler. So I'll defer to all the local practitioners here on how much of a problem this is, but it seems to me that you have the most of these changes to the tree canopy stuff do successfully make things easier to build, remove unintended barriers to infill, but they do that at the cost of making the code even more complicated in some cases and putting more requirements on the cities. It seemed to me that giving ground on the ANSI A300 standards would be an easy way to reduce the compliance cost on the cities. And anyway, that is a choice you chose not. You did not make here. I would call that to your attention that we are increasing the complexity and therefore the number of checklists that need to be checked along the way to all these projects happening as well.
So I appreciate that feedback, Michael. And to me, it becomes less complex. Maybe if we weren't looking at it in strike through, it might, but maybe there are other ways to make it simpler. And you're right that some of it was trying to reduce the burden on local governments. That moving from quarter-acre parking lots to half-acre parking lots, and doing some other things that just made it easier for those reviews. And you're also right that one of the things was trying to not discourage redevelopment of existing developments that have a lot of parking. So that tweak to focus on new. So
well, I mean, if you really want to make it simple for the cities, you could just let the city decide how big the parking lot should be, right? So that would be one way to do it. The effect of this change is mostly on, is this going to burden people who want to build a half-acre park or a quarter-acre parking lot? seems to me.
Yeah, between half and half and a quarter. Yeah. So so maybe we'll end up with a bunch of 69 spot parking lots. I don't know. Just under the half acre.
Right. Thanks for the comments. Skylar, and then we'll go to Joseph.
Yeah, so first of all, I really appreciate the, I think obviously the intent here is more heat islands than anything. And I think I think these generally are good at getting there. Just a couple of maybe technical clarifications on this. I recall in the guidance on this section that I believe it said that the cities had an option between 4A, A, B, and C, whereas I read the rules as the development has the choice between 4A, A, B, and C, which would mean that the city has to adopt all three. And that's what we've done in our draft. So I don't know what your intent is there, but would just suggest clarifying it. And then the other thing is the $1,500. I don't think that a dollar amount appears elsewhere in Division 12 anywhere, but I would suggest maybe that this be reworded in a way that it's either a minimum of $1,500 or even better, that it's indexed somehow. Our draft adopts that fee into our fee schedule, and it would scale annually with the construction cost index for the region. Because we don't want to get in a situation where 10 years down the road, $1,500 is nothing in the grand scheme of things if you can get a parking lot out of it. And so we just want to make sure that the cost of that pay into the system is scaling with the cost of development over time.
Thanks for that feedback. Certainly, I think we had first imagined those three options under 4A to be offered to all developers, but some local governments asked us if they could only offer some of those, and we said, well, I suppose so. A development is still legally providing one of those three, and the local government's just choosing, okay, you can't pay a fee in lieu, you have to do whatever choice among those. So we wanted to be flexible to what the local governments wanted on that. So maybe we'll clarify that is our intent, to defer to local governments. So on that, we can clarify that. There's one other place, at least in Division 12, where there's a reference to pricing to a specific dollar amount. But that's just for cities over 100,000. So that's but it's a tricky wicket, but I understand your point there, and we'll consider that.
Thank you. All right, over to Joseph and then Nat.
Hi, this is Joseph Off with the City of Hillsborough. Regarding Section 440 and other parking mandates section, our city supports parking reform, but the city wants to be able to determine the appropriate locations and approaches for parking reform within our city that considers both land use, surrounding context, and safety. There needs to be more flexibility given in the rule, such as allowing local jurisdictions to require more than one parking space for people with disabilities when the developer chooses not to provide no off-street parking. These parking reform concerns require a larger conversation that can hopefully be handled through the TAC.
Thank you, Joseph. I would be interested to if your understanding of the Oregon revised statutes is different than ours and our councils. That the ORS is what's limiting how many ADA parking spaces can be required. That's our reading of it. That it's in relation to how much parking is built. So I don't know how to get out of that in these rules, but happy to hear your feedback on that. Obviously, we exempted ADA spaces from the rules, and we were attempting to hold that harmless.
My understanding right now is from your guidance and just from us talking to our city attorney is that we can only require one space for a person with disabilities if the developer is providing no off-street parking at all. And so there's nothing where we can choose to go higher. And there was an email that basically said it's from DLCD that said it would be the local jurisdictions would need to go and push the legislature to change the rules so we can require more than one parking space for people with disabilities, where this is being happened through this whole CFEC process. So it seemed like the opportunity could be now, since we're modifying the rules, to allow that flexibility in that area instead of having putting the burden on the local jurisdictions to ask the legislature to allow us the ability to require additional parking for people with disabilities.
I don't want to belabor this too much, and I'm happy to talk to you with this offline, but I think the way under Oregon revised statute to get a second required ADA space is to mandate 26 spaces like that. Like it's a parking table. Like how do you mandate? You're mandating 24 non-ADA spaces, that first one, and then the 26th. But I don't want to derail the whole conversation, but certainly we struggled with this and we dug into it, and that's my reading of how under current law, even pre-CPAC, cities could require a second ADA spaces, require them to get into the next level of the table. That's in statute, but
Thanks, Joseph.
so yeah, we can talk offline and yeah, if you want to say anything more right now, go for it. But
no, I think it's just let's push it to the TAC, but I think we need to discuss it in a TAC.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, and Matt.
Yeah, Matt Brinkley, City of Medford. So 415D, it looks like you're proposing that it's to be stricken in its entirety, which I think is probably a good thing. Can you just speak to that quickly? It seemed to me like with parking maximums, there was a conflict between D and then the allowances for larger communities over 100,000.
I can speak to it generally. I'm not sure I understand your second point, but yeah, generally we wanted to reduce the burden on local governments to do an analysis on that 150% of it.
Well, so specifically with multifamily in a CFA, or I guess citywide, the maximum for communities over 100,000 was 2 off-street parking spaces for non-studio. But in D, it would have been 150%. So if your minimum was 1 space for multifamily, it seemed like that was inconsistent or penalizing smaller communities.
Yeah, we certainly were hoping that people would think through it and could adopt a higher parking maximum if they had findings than that 150% ratio.
Okay.
But we said that's a bunch of work that's less critical to our core aims in the parking reforms, and anything we can do to reduce the burden is great.
Okay, and then just one more question on 405-2. You've added in on-street parking, so conversion of unused on-street parking spaces. What are you contemplating would be policies that we would use for converting unused on-street parking?
Yeah, just provisions that assist in parklets and other things like that. We published some samples from various cities in our guidance document, which has been updated since the April rules. So that's available online. There's a link to Milwaukee and Salem and Bend's parklet programs. I'm not sure. Medford probably had one too. Something like that. It's not a high bar to get over, but we're trying to make sure that if parking is unused, we can use it for something that we'd like to have it be used or underused, I should say.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. And Jessica?
Thank you. Jessica Pellis, Washington County. And since somebody else brought up 415, we were wondering why the inclusion of the date about the Metro Title VI map. We are a little bit concerned because we have noted some inaccuracies with the map, and we talked with Metro staff about it a couple of months ago, back in December, actually. So we're wondering if maybe it would be better to just say the most recently adopted map to account for changes that will happen as these inaccuracies are addressed over time.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Jessica. And this this hopefully is something either the TAC or a subgroup not in a committee meeting, I don't know, can iron out. We have a legal prohibition from delegating our authority to other governments. And so if we're to say whatever map they want is fine, and they can like, we can't do that. And so that's why we're trying to put in a specific date. So if we should get a different date in there or some process, it's like when people are like, what map do you mean? So that was that provision of saying, okay, we need to pick a map. And it was, okay, when the commission adopted the rules, that's the map that we need to rely on. So so if we can figure out a way that works for both our legal authority to not like I trust Tom and Kim and Metro, like I trust y'all, but we're not allowed to do that legally. So trying to get that ironed out. We'd love your partnership in doing that. Yeah, but that's the reasoning behind it, is we needed a specific thing. So yeah.
Thanks, Jessica. Others, any other comments or questions on these parking rules changes? Well, should we take a quick break? Folks wanna, okay. So let's take a break, and we do have one other rule that staff identified for discussion today, and then we can open it up to broader conversation. Let's get back together at 2:15, and we'll continue the conversation then. All right, so welcome back, folks. It's about 2:15 here, so we'll get started. Before we dive into the next set of rule topics, I do just want to do a quick process check. We're going to have public comment towards the end of today's meeting. If you're a member of the public and you think you want to make a comment, do you mind just raising your hand so we get a sense of how many folks we have, and just keep it up for a minute so that we can tally that up. Or maybe there aren't any members of the public who'd like to make comment. Okay, we'll check again when we actually get to public comment period. I just wanted to get a sense. Okay, thank you for that. So we'll go to our last set of rules here that staff wanted to flag for discussion today. And then after that, we'll open it up for broader discussion and hear, what other questions you have generally on the rules and any other rule topics that you want to flag for discussion either today or to line up for the June Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting. So I'm going to hand it over to Bill to walk through this last slide.
You still me on? Try to get myself here. Not just like a little on the screen there. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about Rule 830 right now. So just to refresh folks' memory, Rule 830 is a new rule that requires local governments to review certain roadway capacity increasing projects basically before the local government puts it in its local transportation system plan. There's an entire list. Section 1 of the rule says what's in and what's out. 1A says these are the kinds of projects you need to review. Section 1B says except these. And there's a whole long list of things that you don't then have to review. So the exceptions to that. 1C talks about again projects that don't need to be reviewed because they're already underway. So this is one of these things that probably could have even gone in Rule 12. It really is about that interim period before that first transportation system plan update that meets the updated rules is adopted. We've interpreted this rule all along from during the rulemaking into today as to say, basically, if you have existing today acknowledged plan that includes a project that would have to be reviewed by this rule, you can still do that project right now. You've got an existing acknowledged plan that lets you do that project. That's great. That's fine. You don't need to do this review now. The rule doesn't apply once it was adopted. It applies from TSPs moving forward. And I think we heard near the end of the rulemaking process that there's some lack of clarity about that. So we wanted to put something in there that clarified that said, yes, we're really just talking about projects that they're at least somewhat underway, that you would be able to continue to do that project even at the time you do your TSP update. Those projects, and there's a lot of TSPs out there. Different TSPs handle this differently, but there's a lot of TSPs out there that have a whole long list of projects that might need to be reviewed by this rule that are out there and have been out there maybe for decades, right? And aren't expected to be constructed anytime soon. So there's those, and then there's also ones that their shovels turning in the dirt now. I mean, we don't want to necessarily review those because there's already been progress has been made on those. And we heard that the provision that we put in there was maybe confusing and not clear enough about what would have to be reviewed, what wouldn't have to be reviewed at the time that a major TSP update came. So our intent with this, and this is part of the temporary rules, this is actually in the rules right now, was a change to clarify how those planned projects that are underway, if they need to be reviewed or not. So basically there's a list of tests in that rule that says, and I'll talk about it real quick. It's not on the slide here, but it's in 30 section 1C. Go ahead. Exactly. Because I think I do want to be clear about this with folks so that we're all on the same page. So we said and this was something that, you know, we talked about with our commission and took input from for our commission meeting for the temporary rules as well. Oh, geez, I have. Well, you open it for me. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So there's 4 different tests, and if the project meets any one of these, then the project would not need to be reviewed at the time of doing a major TSP update. The project is included in a general obligation bond approved by the voters before January 1st, 2022. So it's already been approved and as part of that bond project list. Included is a project phase other than planning in the STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program, a metropolitan, an MPO's TIP or regional or metropolitan improvement program, different names, different places, or an adopted local transportation improvement program. So if you've got a capital program that has programmed funds to do that work, to do that project, then we feel that's far enough along for you to be okay. C is the project's received a decision under the National Environmental Policy Act. So it's got a NEPA, either a FONSI or it's got a record decision of some sort, then you're clear at that point. Or the project has been advertised for construction bids. And I think, you know, it's likely if you've got that point, you're probably one of these other ones too, but we just want to cover our bases there. So that's the change that we've made to Rule 830. I just want to be real clear about Rule 830. This hasn't changed. This is the way the rule's always been written. It's a local decision that's made locally about projects that go in the local transportation system plan. So there's no additional review by TLCD or ODOT of these decisions. And the point of the rule is really just to take a step back and think, do we really need to do this project? And, you know, we could have written a rule that said, don't do these kind of projects, because in general, these kind of projects are not the direction that we want to go to meet a lot of our goals, right? We want to make sure we're focusing investment in other areas. But we understand and realize that there's going to be circumstances where these types of projects are going to be necessary to create connectivity to serve growing areas. It's unavoidable that these types of facilities are going to be necessary sometimes. And so in those cases, we wanted to have a provision in there that really let local government take a look and say, what are the things we can do to reduce the impact of these facilities, or to maybe we don't need to have these facilities. So that's the point of the rule. It's a local decision. There's no additional DLCD review on top of this for these or anything. So there's some of the concerns I've heard about this rule. I just want to be real clear about that. Happy to answer any questions about this rule or about this proposed change.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, over to the committee. Just go ahead and raise your hand if you have any questions or comments on this rule. See hand up from Michael Anderson. Go ahead.
Thank you. So on the D, the advertised construction bids, that seems pretty broad. Does it need any? Our reaction is that could be tightened. Is there a way to add a date to it, for example? Like it seems like advertised for construction bids prior to a certain time. Is that appropriate?
Yeah. Oh, geez. Sorry about that. Thank you for that question. I think the conversations we had with folks that do this type of project development, that's a pretty late stage of the process. If you're advertising construction bids, that's going to happen relatively soon. That dirt's going to be turning. And so if folks are already doing that, it's not like it's going to take them years for the start building that project. So we felt that was probably a pretty late stage item. And it's really in there because, it's likely many other projects are covered by one of those other items, but it's potential that, it's a project that didn't have any federal funds when we NEPA review, for example, wasn't included in a bond, and potentially, I understand there's some local jurisdictions that don't necessarily have the same kind of capital planning process. It's a wide variety of doing things out there. That's part of the problem. We're trying to come up with, a single set of doing things out there. There's just lots of different ways of handling this. So we feel pretty comfortable with that one in particular, that that's comes so late in the process that if someone's already doing that, that project's well underway.
Right. Yeah, I guess maybe this is a clarifying question about subsection C in general, including all of those A, B, C, D, is meets any of the following by such and such timeline referent or something like that. Maybe there, I think maybe that's the source of the ambiguity that we're responding to. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and maybe I could be clear about that. In the intention is that this is prior to the major TSP update.
Right. Yeah, that could be perhaps clearer.
Thanks, Michael. Over to Joseph and then Matt.
Hi, this is Joseph Off at the City of Hillsborough. This section of the rule, as my understanding, was added after the July 1st public deadline that occurred for the rules. So they didn't get any type of review from the local jurisdictions. Basically, my position right now is that it just needs to be deleted from the rule itself. I had many conversations with Bill on this matter, that once we adopt a project in a TSP, we move forward with that project. It may not go into full construction, but we're already working on acquiring right-of-way, asking for right-of-way dedications, working with developers on different setbacks. The city does this extensive CAD work out there, drawing the different roadway alignments for the different roads, et cetera, and a massive amount of public outreach to the public on this. And so it's kind of weird to go to the public and saying, hey, we're doing this project, we're doing the whole planning of the road and everything, and then to come back and saying, hey, we're going to have to go back and do a high level needs analysis, just because the rule is saying it, even though we adopted this project already and already done that high level needs analysis. So basically, the city doesn't want to go backwards to do a high level needs analysis after we invested all the staff and consultant time and city funds producing a preliminary design for the transportation project. We also see this section impacting interchange access management plans that ODOT works on that look at the long-term safety and operations needs of the interchange. And so my suggestion right now is just delete it. I talked to other jurisdictions and they feel the same way. It's causing more headaches, just because we don't want to go back to their community and ask them if this project is needed and do all this additional analysis when we are already moving forward with that project. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. And I know we've had this conversation before, and I'll just reiterate that I think deleting the section would have the opposite effect of what you're asking for, which is, and that's the reason why we added this fairly late in the rulemaking process. I don't remember exactly how that works, but we wanted to be sure that jurisdictions that had projects in their acknowledged PSPs today, that were working on projects and making progress on them, wouldn't have to go back and do this review now before doing a major TSP update. And I think you recently could potentially read the rule that way. On the other hand, it is the intention of this rule, and it's the policy objective here, that projects that are on the books that are further out, that aren't underway now, don't meet one of these criteria, that they do go through this review process, and that most potentially don't move forward in the next TSP, because we are trying to change. The future needs to look different than things look today, right? We need to change how transportation system planning works in order to meet our goals. And I'm being real blunt about this because I think I need to maybe, that all the projects that are on the books now, we can't be doing all of those. And if you just let them stay on there kind of all the time and without going through some extra steps, we're not going to meet our objectives. It's going to be real difficult to do that. So that's the idea here, is that we're providing a window for certain projects that are on those acknowledged plans to move forward without going through this review. But at some point, projects that are on the books, or whether they're on the books or not, will have to go through this review. Now, again, there's a different question about what is the review and what does that look like? And I think I think you said like a NEPA. It's not a NEPA review. It's not that level. And no one's done one of these yet. So I think we still have some work to do on developing guidance, and we'll work with ODOT on that to make sure that we're providing something that makes sense for communities to be able to do these. I expect most of these will be done as part of the transportation system plan update itself. It's built so that you could do it independently if you wanted to. You don't have to do it as part of TSP update, but it's out of scope of this project, of this rulemaking, to say that we would change the rule in a way to not require this review for projects that happen to be on existing plans, but past the date of the adopted next time you do a TSP update.
I want to clarify, I didn't mention NEPA, I mentioned the high level needs analysis. It's an alternative analysis where we have already moved forward with designing, during preliminary design of a project. It has not broken down on construction yet, but we have already done a lot of investment. Then to go backwards, because we're having a TSP update, to then say, hey, is this project still needed or not? That's not an appropriate approach. We have already invested so much moving forward, and a lot of this is being, some of these road improvements are being built by developers, not by the cities or counties, but we are having to lay out the alignments of the roadways so developers know where to build the roads. And we can discuss about it during attack, but this is a major issue here. And so I just wanted to clarify this. This is not just me speaking. I've talked to other jurisdictions and they have concerns with this as well. So,
and if we're talking about, clarifying or making clear about what kinds of projects are underway and how far underway they are, and what's a good threshold for a project that's underway, that's within the scope of what we're talking about here. That's what the temporary rule was trying to get at. And we can talk about that, absolutely. If the concept is to take every sort of project that is in a TSP today and moving it forward without review, regardless of how far along it is, that's outside the scope of what we're able to talk about, because that would be a policy shift that would be outside the scope of this. Just real clear.
And we can probably discuss more during attack, but maybe it needs to focus on preliminary design work, because right now, how I'm reading it, it's looking at it that it has to be like moving forward on a construction level, not even, it's not considering that, hey, we're doing preliminary design for this work. So maybe that's.
Yeah, I think this is something we can talk about in attack. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Joseph. Appreciate that. All right, let's go to Matt and then Indy.
So, Bill, I guess I don't want to belabor this point too much longer, but how does this affect then projects in a TSP that were noticed according to 1212A by December 31st, 2022? So you're saying, I guess, to clarify, these new, or these 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of qualifiers that project, had a general obligation bond, et cetera, is moving to construction, et cetera. Are these new kind of qualifiers that are being added to this? Because my understanding when the rule was created was that projects that were in a financially constrained list in your TSP did not have to undergo the 830 review.
So you're talking about the existing acknowledged TSP that you got right now. Yeah, that's correct. So if you're working on a project right now,
so I think sorry to interrupt. I mean, I think that's the point. My understanding, I think, of the rule before, and maybe I missed this, was that if it was in acknowledged TSP in your financially constrained list, that those projects did not need to undergo the 830 review.
I don't, let me see, let me just double check, look at the old rule here.
And I guess we can talk about this offline too, but
I think I know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
So Matt, this is Cody with DLC. Previously and now, when you do a major TS, like anything that you have now, before you do your major TSP update, it's in your acknowledged plan, whether it's fiscally constrained project list or not, doesn't have to go through a review, right? It's in your plan now. It's
Right.
good to be built and developed. What this rule adds is saying, when you go to update your major TSP update,
Okay.
then if you have a project from your previous TSP that is on a capital improvement plan, it's like getting ready to be
Okay.
constructed, then you don't need to review it as a part of that TSP update. So it's
Okay.
kind of like
Okay.
a safe harbor for when you're doing that major TSP update, and this rule would be triggered to go back and review all the projects in your previous plan. These ones that are like in line for construction with these 4 tests, qualifiers, as you say, do not need to be reviewed at that time.
Okay, I got you. That helps. That answers the question. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Good. Thank you.
And Indy?
Yeah, thank you. Indy Namkun from Verde. I want to kind of echo Michael from Sightline on the sort of need to be constrained and really thoughtful about where we're offering safe harbor here. And obviously don't want to be wasting public resources or people's time going into planning and figuring out these projects. So I think it's important to have a mechanism to allow things to proceed, but also rethink things that are already in the pipeline and be really clear about where we're drawing those lines and where it's shifting burden and disruption. We need to weigh, the costs of, changing tack on bigger projects like this against the cost to the public of 6+ more years of progress completion on projects that we know aren't aligned with our climate and public health needs. Those costs exist in the public, and particularly for communities like mine that live near facilities that are increasing air pollution because more cars are on the roads, people who are dying while walking through their neighborhood or riding their bikes, who are already experiencing deadly climate impacts in their neighborhoods. These disruptions are real and they exist in my life, the lives of most people in my community. And I don't want to downplay how disruptive, how challenging it can be to change tack after, like in some cases, decades of planning on these projects. It's very real, but the burden doesn't go away if we decline to push ourselves, ask ourselves to change course on these projects. That burden shifts to people who are already frequently not getting their needs met by a lot of our existing plans. So just want to elevate the need to strike a balance there. And yeah, I would be eager. I know we don't have a ton of time today, but would be eager to continue discussing sort of that timeline and where those lines are in this space and possibly on the TAC as we hear more about that. Thank you.
And Ariel?
Thanks. Ariel Nilsson, League of Oregon Cities. Kind of along these same lines, and in addition to what Anthony was sharing, he mentioned, part of the issue is the work and the time, and that with potentially duplicative public outreach that this would require them to do. But he also mentioned that the project involves developers, which means housing development, needing to get the lines down for that. And I'm just curious, maybe this was a question that should have been brought up at the beginning, so I apologize, but you mentioned in the scope and kind of the lenses that bringing to this rulemaking, that the passage of ONA, House Bill 2001, there's some alignment that needs to happen there. I'm curious, similarly with both ONA as well as the governor's emergency orders and the state of emergency that we're now in for housing production, if there's going to be that lens at all to some of these conversations and this analysis when we're considering impacts to ongoing housing development or proposed housing development.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Absolutely. We're talking about within the scope of this rulemaking, are we able to make sure that we're consistent with our housing objectives or housing production objectives? We can take a very close look at that. And I'm happy to continue to follow up with City Hillsborough or other local governments to figure out, make sure that the thresholds we're talking about make sense and that we're not impeding housing development through unintentionally through these rules. And then again, next year, as the ONA process moves forward, they're going to be required to do rulemaking for different parts of the agency or the commission's rules. And we will be a party to that, making sure that Division 12, the different pieces of Division 12 line up with the direction that ONA is moving as well. So I think, yeah, a couple different pieces there for sure.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So does that mean that the alignment or potential conflicts with the ONA rulemaking you won't actually take that lens until next year, or are you going to think about it if there's opportunities, even just looking at the statutory direction in ONA, as well as, I think the governor's emergency order applies to all agency actions now, if there's the opportunity to take that lens now?
Absolutely, to the extent that we are able to within this rulemaking process, be in alignment with all those things, but let's do it as soon as we can. That's for sure. I don't think the agency is going to have an opportunity systemically to do that. We can do it opportunistically within this rulemaking for sure. And we can help work with folks to identify where we can do that. That's great. But systemically looking at the whole thing, how it's all work together with kind of the new pieces of ONA, which I'm not an expert on at all, and I just want to make sure that we're all walking in the same direction. That's the program for 2024. Yeah.
We might make a distinction here between doing things that are helping for housing, and we certainly want to do everything in this process to be helpful for housing, versus trying to get specific alignment with a program that hasn't been built yet, which is hard to do. And one of the best things to do to make it easier to build housing is to not require housing developers to build large, expensive transportation projects as part of that housing development.
Thank you. And thanks for the questions, Ariel. Skylar, I see your hand up, but just I want to check in. I know this is about the time where we were going to open up to public comment. I want to see if there were folks that wanted to make comment, and if not, we can let this conversation go a little bit longer. Okay, then let's go to, and for members of the public that do want to provide anything in writing, there is an email address where you can provide that to, and maybe Casaria can put that in the chat as well. Let's go to Skylar's comment on this rule, and maybe let's have that be the last comment, and then we'll open it up to kind of broader conversation and see if there are other topics that folks want to flag for the June rulemaking advisory committee meeting. Yes, Skylar, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Skylar Warren, City of Tigard. I promise to be brief in this. I just want to voice on behalf of City of Tigard, we've very closely read these rules. We understand the intent behind them, and just want to voice our support for the rules as both originally written, but also as amended. We do think they provide some valuable exceptions for projects that are far along. We do think that looking at the full scope of our transportation system moving forward in our TSPs is critical to meeting statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals, VMT reduction goals, and our own climate goals and our own transportation goals around walkability. So I just wanted to offer some support for this as written. We're welcoming this. We have long been frustrated with the over-reliance on motor vehicle mobility standards driving transportation systems. Thanks.
Thank you, Skylar. Appreciate that. All right, so we have a little bit of time here to see if folks want to flag any other topics that you saw in the rules for discussion at the June meeting. There's also, of course, going to be a post-meeting survey where you can dig a little deeper, take your time, and think about it and flag topics there, but just want to open the floor to see if anybody has anything they want to flag here, or just you have any additional comments that you weren't able to make earlier today. And I'm also going to say, if you haven't gotten into the conversation, we would love to hear from you, and we'll prioritize hearing from folks we haven't heard from yet, such as Brandon. So we're going to go to Brandon first.
Hi, it's Brandon. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I appreciate the extra time these rules are giving us. For our community, some of these rules are going to seem really strange in some ways, because we have people who do a lot of commuting because they work construction or house cleaning or agricultural work, that they're going to wonder, how is this future going to fit in? How are they not going to be left out? So having that additional time and having as much flexibility in the rules to implement them locally in a way that makes the most sense for our community is going to have a really big impact on how well these are received.
That, Brandon, appreciate it. Michael?
I wanted to raise 0630 bike parking. I brought it up at the LCDC meeting the other day, and I'd love to revisit some of the question raised by Star and Ethos and Reach as folks who are trying to build housing and including affordable housing and finding like parking barriers to be a barrier. I'd be happy to specify that, but I know Evan's familiar with the conversation and Bill and so on. It seems to me that there is not a easy philosophical distinction to be made between the state knows the correct amount of bike parking that affordable housing developments in Cornelius need to have, and the city does not know the correct amount of auto parking that they need to have. It seems to me that we should have flexibility on both in order to ensure that we're meeting the housing goals, especially in the climate friendly areas. And according to the developers I've spoken with, setting higher standards for bike parking is certainly going to cause trade-offs. It's going to make some projects difficult. We can't get out of it just by making it outdoors because land is scarce. So the requirement that it be indoor, like you see in Portland right now, I think, and other cities are considering, if not don't have already, you can say, well, that's because they're setting very high standards for their indoor bike parking. But ultimately, it is the number of spaces that becomes the constraint. And the state is proposing to improve those standards, raise those numbers, seems to me.
Thank you, Michael. And Jessica?
Thank you, Jessica Pelz, Washington County. I had a question about section 510. This is 3C. I was a little concerned about the use of the word substantial in that section. It says a substantial portion of the right of way dedicated to transportation uses must be dedicated to pedestrian uses. And I'm just curious how that will be quantified, or what is the intent behind the word substantial? This seems like a word that is ripe for litigation.
And maybe, some of these questions may be difficult to answer on the spot. So I'm going to see if DLCD wants to talk about that at our next meeting, or if that's something you can answer now.
Thank you, Jessica. If I remember right, this was something that went back and forth a bit in the Rulemaking Advisory Committee originally. We're not proposing, that's not new or proposed to change. The one change we did make to that subsection is that we are clarifying it's right of way dedicated to transportation uses. We did hear a comment that, what about right of way that's just dedicated to, say, utility uses or something like that? Do we need to reserve some of that for pedestrian uses? Doesn't seem, I think that's an edge case, but I think it doesn't seem likely, so it doesn't seem reasonable. So we did make that one change and propose that one change in this draft, but the substantial part isn't changing. Yeah, good question. What does that mean? And maybe we have a clear way of getting at what we're trying to get at there, which is, you know, climate friendly areas in Metro 2040 centers are supposed to be walkable places. They're supposed to be places where you know, pedestrians come first, right? And you know, you can see, you know, think about, you know, there's places where you might have a street that is more intended for through movement of vehicles that has maybe narrower sidewalks than other facilities in the same neighborhood. Something like that seems, you know, reasonable, and that would be consistent with this. That's why we didn't, you know, talk about necessarily specific facilities. We're just talking about the entire area. But what does substantial mean? Does that mean 51%? I don't think so, but I think you'd have to have that discussion.
Thanks, Jessica. And Ryan, you see your hand up there?
Hi. Yeah, just a couple of things that we were looking for clarification on here in Corvallis. One is the block length standard in CFAs. There's a 500-foot block length maximum in 320, but then in 330, it seems like there's an allowance to count pedestrian facilities toward that, or to use that in lieu of streets. And just want to make sure that we're right in interpreting it that way. Also, might help to define exactly what a block face is or a block length is. We've had some challenges here locally with block faces. It's really easy when you have rectilinear street pattern, a nice grid and rectangular blocks to determine where to measure that block length is. But when you have curved streets or even cul-de-sacs, that becomes challenging to determine where you're measuring to and from. And then in 310, the 750-foot rule, CFAs need to be at least 750 feet wide. Initially, we were interpreting that to be in any dimension, but then the more recent CFA guidance says you need to be able to fit a 750-foot wide circle inside each CFA. So that kind of changes how we're looking at a couple of our CFA candidates locally. If that's the way that we should be looking at it, fitting a full circle inside, that's fine, but the rules should probably be updated to explicitly state that. I might have a couple other things that I'll include in the survey as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. And I know we just have a couple of minutes here, so let's hear from Neil, and then I think we'll move into our next steps in closing. So Neil, over to you.
All right, I can be brief. I just wanted to comment and kind of similar to Indy, wanted to make sure that, you know, we're making these rules workable for cities, but also we just really want to make sure that we're ensuring and maintaining that component of accountability and urgency through this process. It's, you know, it's concerning for us to see, you know, in that workable lens, pushing dates all the way to 2029 and the implications of that in many different areas and how that will overlap with UGB processes and CFEC rules. So I think that's just kind of a general concern of ours, is wanting to make sure that we're accomplishing both of these goals at the same time.
I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your great discussion today, all the questions and comments. I think with our last few minutes here, we'll move into next steps and wrap up. So I'll hand it over to Bill with just some kind of logistical next steps, and there might be a slide on that. And then we'll go to Commissioner Warren to close us out.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. So again, Bill Holmstrom. Like I've noted before, we have a survey to RAC members that will be going out as already, like pretty soon this afternoon. And really, it does what we just did, but you know, it gives you the opportunity to do it in writing. Is what are the other rules that you would like to really make sure that we're paying attention to as part of this rulemaking that we can focus on at the technical advisory committee meeting and in our next RAC meeting. We went through and identified the ones we thought might have the most interest and attention to it. We figured out some ones that maybe are a little bit lower on the list. Some people brought up some things that we might need to talk about. And then we identified some things that are really just minor changes and really small stuff. So we didn't really think we need to pay much attention to it, but we have those all listed out for you to take a look at and say, yes, I really would like to look at that rule. We can make room to do that. And so we'll use that survey to prioritize those and make sure that we're spending enough time talking about the things that you guys want to talk about. That's going to be due Tuesday. It's right after the holiday next week. Give you that data to send in that survey. It's just a Survey Monkey thing. It's got just lists the rules, and you'll be able to click on the ones that you'd like to focus on. There's also an opportunity in there to put in your comments that are other pieces in there that we don't have in our draft that you might want to bring up. The reason why it's kind of a fast turnaround is because we want to have that ahead of the next Technical Advisory Committee meeting. Our next RAC meeting of this group is going to be Monday, June 12th, and that's from 9 a.m. to noon, so in the morning. The Technical Advisory Committee, I already described kind of what that is, but I will just say again, if you or someone you know wishes to participate in that advisory committee meeting, please email us. That's, I think someone changed my slide here. Okay. That's email address is not quite right. It's at dlcd.org.gov. They just changed all of our email addresses last year or something, so we're still getting used to it. But so please email us by tomorrow morning. We're also going to be sending an email out to local planners at every affected local jurisdiction, every city and county that's affected by these rules, just to let them know about this Technical Advisory Committee meeting as well. It's aimed at practitioners, but certainly open to anyone else on the advisory committee that would like to participate as well. Again, we're doing this because we were asked to do this. I think, I certainly appreciate the time that everyone spends to do this work and to spend working with us on this advisory committee meeting. We understand that this is yet another potential commitment of time, so it is optional. But understand that folks would like to have that opportunity. Absolutely happy to give them that opportunity. And I expect that we'll be able to give kind of an update of what happened at that meeting at the next Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting. If you are unable, just don't have the time to participate in the TAP. That meeting is going to happen next week from today. It's going to happen on June 1st. It's going to be, we're scheduling for 2 hours. We've got a couple windows that we figured out would work, either 9 or 10 a.m. So 9 to 11 or 10 to noon, or 1 to 3 or 2 to 4. So if you can let us know which one of those times work best for you, we can try to figure out what works the best for everybody, or as many people as we can. We understand, just working at this kind of time frame, it's hard to find times for everybody to work. So not even everyone can make this advisory committee. So we try to do our best. And I think that is my last slide. So thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. And I'll hand it over to Commissioner Warren.
Thank you, Sylvia. And thank you everyone else for being here today. I really appreciate your time, and I know that staff does as well. I want you to know that I'm listening and I hear all of you. I think there are some really great points brought up today. And I appreciate advocacy from kind of both our cities and county staff, as well as our advocates as well. And I look forward to seeing you again on June 12th, and have a great rest of your day and enjoy the long weekend. Thank you.
Commissioner, take care, everyone. Appreciate